Lastly, HMIS, I've already touched on this a couple of times, the eligible applicant for the HMIS project. I'm going to pause here for a moment. I see a question in the chat. So the question is, I understand that past project performance must be evaluated when an agency is requesting an expansion. Please address the rationale for the required extensive expansion application. So the reason why, yes, if you're applying for expansion funding, you'll notice that there are pretty extensive narrative responses that are being asked of the applicant agency. In many ways, it mirrors what a non-expansion new project application would look like. So really the part of the reason behind that is really recognizing that we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into our projects that are currently receiving CoC funding. We understand that, yes, we can look at the data and see that, X percentage of people exit to housing or X percentage of people increase their income and employment, and those are great performance factors. But in order to really do a better job of diving in and evaluating in a more fulsome manner how those projects really operate kind of behind the scenes and really getting into more of the details of them, that's why we're asking a lot of those same questions, just to really help us better understand those programs and how they operate. Okay. Want to talk a bit about HMIS requirements as well for all projects. So I referenced earlier that, all projects who receive CoC funding are required to use the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. Again, this is a HUD requirement. If you are new to HMIS, if you've never used it before, there are training requirements, which quite frankly may be a bit extensive, that your agency will need to complete prior to beginning to enter data into HMIS. And there's a link in the RFP to, again, where you can find on our website what some of those training requirements may be, if this is all new to you. Additionally, if the particular project in question is new to HMIS, there might be additional workflow trainings that your staff would have to undertake, depending on, again, the project type, your agencies or your staff's experience with HMIS. So there's kind of a lot of there that's going to be dependent on what ultimately is funded. If your project is selected for funding, the HMIS lead agency, which again is HAND, we will work closely with your staff for that training and that onboarding. So just make note of that if you are new to HMIS, that this is going to be a pretty key piece of the ramping up and the onboarding of your project. And once HUD makes those funding announcements kind of in the spring of 2024, we will then have on our radar kind of who needs to be onboarded for some of this HMIS training. So there would be additional communication at that time. Projects that receive funding for the domestic violence bonus funding. So DV bonus projects are also required to use either our standard HMIS system or a comparable database. So HUD has provided they provided this decision-making tree to help you as an agency determine if a comparable database is necessary. So there's a link to that on page 13 in the RFP. So if you are applying for domestic violence bonus funding, before you start the application, please take a moment to walk through that decision-making tree to determine if you will need a comparable database for your project or not. A lot of it's going to depend on other sources of funding that you receive as an agency and how those funds are used. There's going to be questions in the application that will ask you if you need a comparable database, your experience with a comparable database, how you plan, if you need a comparable database and you don't have one, your plan to get one off the ground and to get one in place by the time the project starts. You can, as a DV bonus projects, may request, again, an HMIS budget line to cover some costs associated with the comparable database. But I would just caution that if you need to start a comparable database from scratch, we may not have the sufficient funding to fund that entire process, and also the timing probably would not work out. We are really going to be looking for agencies, again, if you need a comparable database, you're able to demonstrate that you will have that database in place really by the time the project gets off the ground. So really if you're awarded funding, once you get that award announcement in early 2024, the planning should start then on how your database will be ready to go by, that fall or so in terms of when the project is going to actually start. So just be mindful of that if you are applying for DV bonus funding. And if you want to talk more about that, if you're applying for DV bonus funding, happy to have some more conversations. If your project is funded with DV bonus, there will be some assistance that our HMIS lead agency can provide. I say some assistance, we can't do the entire work for you, but we can provide you resources and some support and just help to kind of point you in the right direction on how to get that comparable database set up. So this chart is in your RFP as well. This just gives sort of an overview of the budget lines that you can apply for. I'm not going to go into that in a great detail. One thing I will note is there's different types of rental assistance. There's tenant-based rental assistance, sponsor-based, and project-based. Those different types of rental assistance are defined in the RFP. So I would just encourage you to take a look at that and review kind of what those all mean. Likewise, the RFP goes into some detail on the difference between rental assistance and leasing. There are some pretty key differences in those two budget line items. Both of those line items are used to essentially provide a subsidy for the individual in the unit, but they are administered very differently and they have different requirements attached to them. So please just take note of that, the detail in the RFP. So some competitive characteristics. If you are applying for this funding, some things that we will be looking for that may make your application just more competitive. This is, just again, some things that we're going to be looking for during the review process. Overall, experience implementing programming of the kind that you're requesting. That I think is pretty basic for any funding source. There are some expectations and what we're going to be looking for in terms of case manager to client household ratios. With PSH, we're looking for a 1:20 ratio. For rapid rehousing, a 1:25. This is to help make sure that those caseloads are manageable and that people are able to receive, the services that they need. The extent to which you're able to demonstrate an ability to leverage Medicaid funding or other federal funding, again, will be taken into consideration during the review. If you don't have that experience, that doesn't mean you're not eligible to apply. You certainly are. Just know that those are, things that are just, like I said, taken into consideration. Having leases that do not require service participation, that goes to the housing first expectation. So just really, you'll be asked to speak to how you implement housing first within your programming, and the extent to which you have experience using HMIS, again, may benefit your application. If you don't have experience, that doesn't mean you can't apply. So just know that is something we would be looking for. So if your project is funded, you receive funding and you begin your programming is underway. These projects are typically renewed on one-year cycles. So once your project has been under performance, the CoC will evaluate and score your project on an annual basis to determine whether or not it should be submitted to HUD for continued funding. So, for example, we are undergoing that process right now with all of our existing CoC projects. They are currently under review. So if you're funded, we wanted to make you aware of some of those performance expectations that you can expect to be held accountable to. And some of these, change over time. We always try to give agencies, a heads up on when we're setting different performance expectations. But in general, here's what you can expect if you are funded. For permanent supportive housing projects, we really look at the percentage of people who retain their permanent supportive housing, which that's a long-term kind of indefinite housing resource, or if a person moves from PSH to other permanent housing. Essentially, we're looking for permanency within their housing. For rapid rehousing and the joint component project type, which are short-term interventions, we are particularly looking at the percentage of people who exit the project to a permanent housing placement. That is one of the key components. So that permanent housing placement could be, market rate housing. It could be a HCV voucher. It could be another, type of subsidy. But ultimately, we're looking for people to exit to permanent housing. For all project types, we look at the percentage of people who increase their income while they're in the program, how long it takes people to be housed once that referral is received from coordinated entry. We've started to look as well at the extent to which people return to homelessness after they have exited the project to permanent housing, so wanting to reduce recidivism rates. We evaluate project utilization and project expenditures. This helps us to ensure that we are fully utilizing all of our resources available. We look at compliance with, certainly HMIS and coordinated entry requirements. And lastly, for domestic violence projects, we look also and evaluate how the project increases the safety of program participants. Coordinated entry projects are evaluated on slightly different components. We look at client satisfaction. We look at some of the, the processes, we call the match ready package, or the packets that are submitted to get someone on the PSH match list, compliance with different requirements regarding submission of HCV applications, how long it takes to fill vacancy requests, and HMIS compliance. Lastly, for dedicated HMIS projects, they are evaluated on having required policies and procedures in place, bed coverage rates, overall data quality and completion rates, and the extent to which the system is able to produce the required reports for HUD, submission of data to HUD that resolve what HUD requires, in collaboration with domestic violence providers to ensure those comparable databases are in place. So again, you can review in the RFP in more detail some of those performance expectations as well. So I touched briefly on this as well. So this for the CAM governance letter of support for agencies that are going to be applying for new or expanded coordinated entry funding. You must include a letter of support from the CAM governance committee with your application. So you're going to use the template that's on HAN's website, which I'll show in a moment. You're going to complete that template and you're going to email it to me by July 19th. I will then facilitate the process of getting that request to the CAM governance committee. If the CAM governance committee approves that request, you will receive that signed letter from them by August 1st, which you then would upload and include in the online portal with your application. And there will be a specific spot where you will upload it. So again, if you are considering applying for coordinated entry funding, either the CoC bonus or the domestic violence bonus, as you are kind of planning out your work of doing this application, just be mindful of this additional piece of it as well, and that you essentially have an additional deadline of this July 19th to get that letter of support request into me. All right, I'm going to pause to see if there's any other questions before we talk a bit more about the online application portal. Okay. I don't see any additional questions. So we're going to switch over now to I'm going to go show a couple of things. So let me make sure I'm in the right spot. All right. As I referenced before, the applications are being submitted through our online portal this year. So I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat right now. So this first link is to, again, HAN's website, where the screen that I'm sharing right now. So this is, again, where we'll be posting the recording from today and the slides. You can also find the full RFP packet is posted here. It's going to be really important that you read through that because it goes into a lot more detail than what we're just talking about here. Also posted here are the CAM Governance Committee letter of support, that template that I referenced. You're going to download that here, fill it out, email it to me by July 19th. It's a really basic form, essentially asks for some high-level information on what you're intending to apply for and how much. So shouldn't be too laborsome to fill out, but that's the letter of support template you're going to complete. Also on our website here is the PSH budget spreadsheet, which I'll be going over in a few minutes, and the budget spreadsheet for every other project type. So rapid rehousing, the joint component, coordinator entry, or HMIS has their own budget spreadsheet. So PSH is its own, everyone else is also its own spreadsheet. So please be sure that you are completing the appropriate spreadsheet for the type of application that you are applying for. Okay, but what I really want to talk through and show is the online application portal. So you're going to access this portal through this link here. On page 21 of the RFP, there are some additional instructions as well on how to access the portal. Once you click on this link, you're going to be taken to a screen that will look like this. I'm just going to spend a few minutes right now walking through some of the basics of this portal. Hopefully you will find this relatively easy to use. So we're going to give it a go. So when you click on the link to the portal, this is the first page that you're going to see. If you are a new user, you're going to follow the instructions to sign up. It's really basic. I think we've all signed up for online accounts before. You basically need a username and a password. So you will select a username and password. Be sure to remember, I say username, I think you use your email address. So be sure to remember which email address you use, what password you use. Obviously, there's a forget password link if you forget it, because who doesn't forget their passwords these days? So you're going to sign up. If you have already created a portal for the CoC competition, you are a returning user. I know there may be some people on this call who may have accessed this portal in the past for YHDP funding or MISHDA ESG funding. You still need to, even if you're one of those agencies, you still need to you're considered a new user in this instance. Every kind of application portal is new. So if you've never accessed this portal for HUD CoC funding, you're considered a new user. So I'm going to show you what happens when you log in. Okay, so the first time you log in, your screen will look a little bit different because you will need to first complete your profile even before you begin. So completing the profile, right now you can see my profile is complete. You see this green complete button. You can always edit your profile, even if you have completed it. If you need to update your contact information or anything of that nature, this profile is essentially always open and can always be edited. The profile, it's very basic. So what you see here are essentially the questions that are asked. It's your agency name, your agency's address. If you have a different mailing address, contact information, you can add, a primary contact, an alternate contact. We ask just the type of organization that you are, and if you have an active SAM registration, which is the System of Awards Management. This is really just a yes, no, or unsure. So we're not asking you to upload any, proof that you're a nonprofit or upload your active SAMs documentation at this point. This is really just to help us get some information on who you are as an agency. So the profile is, again, it's really basic. And once you fill that out, you save the changes. And again, you can always go back and edit it if you need to make any edits. So once you have completed the profile, what you will then see, you will see this a blue plus mark, which is what you're going to select to work on your project application. What you're seeing here on my screen are some testing that I have done. So each of these that are grayed out that say under review are essentially test applications that I have gone through, completed, and submitted. So you can see, let's just kind of open one up for an example that's under review. So once you submit the application, you would see this sign or this little note, it's been submitted. All you have is the view function. You can't edit it anymore. But once you're starting a new application, what you'll do is you'll click on add another, and then that will pop up. I'll kind of show you what it looks like if you click add another. I'm going to open this one, which says application intake. This is an application that I have started. I started working on it, but I've not completed it. And so that's the other thing with this portal. You can always work on the application, save it, log out, come back the next day, and then pick up your work from where you were the day prior. So for this test application, again, this is the one that I started but haven't submitted, and you can tell that it's not been submitted yet because this submit button is grayed out. And you can also see that says there's like action required, meaning this is just kind of reminding me, hey, there's still work that you need to do on this application. So Jean, your question, can more than one person work on an application? So unfortunately, you're only able to have one like login information. So for those of you who may be familiar with like eSnaps, this is a little bit different than eSnaps. You can only have one email password to log in. So really only one person can be in here at a time working on it. I'm not going to tell you that you can't share that login information with people at your agency. You do what works for you. Be, I guess, mindful of who all has the login access to the system, just so you know who can get in there and work on things and ultimately submit things. But really only one person has that login information and can be logged in at a time to work on it. So to work on the application, you're going to select open. So this kind of test one that I'm doing here is a test rapid rehousing project. I'll just kind of walk you through a little bit of kind of what you're going to see. I'm not going to go through all of these questions. There's a substantial amount of questions. I won't kid you about that. We really, again, as we work through this process of putting together the application, really wanted to have questions that dive into what these programs are like, how they're operating. And so there are certainly a number of questions there. So the first question, some of these questions are very self-explanatory, so I won't waste the time with that. The one thing I want to point out, this kind of message here is that as you it says that as you complete this application, as you work your way through it, you will notice that the questions are not going to be numbered sequentially. They will, they will be numbered, highest to lowest, but you're going to see that they will skip numbers. That's due to the skip logic that's built within the application, and that only certain questions will appear depending on the type of project that is being applied for. So it's really important that these first set of questions are answered accurately, because how you answer these first set of questions is going to dictate the types, which questions later on in the application will ultimately appear. So the first question you're going to want to make sure you answer is, what type of funding are you applying for? Are you applying for the regular CoC bonus or domestic violence bonus? Then you're going to need to select what type of project you're applying for. And you'll note for permanent supportive housing, you're going to select either project-based or scattered site. I referenced earlier, project-based projects have questions related to the site, any rehab, construction. Those questions will only show up if you select that you have a project-based PSH project. Likewise, I'll show you what would happen if you select this joint component project type. Is additionally going to ask if the transitional housing portion of that project is scattered site or project based. So you'll have to select one of those two, because again, it's going to impact the questions that are asked. So for this example, I'm doing a rapid rehousing. The last kind of key question you want to answer is whether it's a new or an expansion project. If it's an expansion project, you're then going to be asked, really some information on the which project you're expanding. So your FY 2022 grant number, I guess if you don't have that grant number, you can use the 2021 grant number. But essentially we need to know, give the project name as well. We need to know what project are you requesting expansion funding for. So that's going to be really important that you select, again, the appropriate question there. So then the last kind of initial question is whether or not your project will have a subrecipient. This is just a drop down yes or no answer. If you answer yes, it's going to ask additional information on who that subrecipient is. And then there's, another question later on that will ask about the amount of funding that subrecipient will be receiving. So for my example, I'm just going to say no. So again, those first few questions are going to be really key for you to answer accurately. And if you, as you can see what I just did now too, say you select them and then as you go along, you realize, oh, rats, I really meant to select CoC bonus or DV bonus. You can go back and forth and change your answers if you realize, you made a mistake. The vast majority of the questions in the application are required. You see, the little red asterisks, which I think we're probably largely used to. That means those are a required question. So this means you won't be able to accidentally submit the application without, with blank, with questions not having been answered. We added that in just as sort of a safeguard for you. If you tried to submit the application and a required question didn't have a response, the system would flag that and wouldn't let you. So obviously, you want to make sure that your responses are complete and they say what you want them to say before you submit it, but it won't let you submit just a blank application. There are a couple of questions that do have some character limits. That if that's indicated there, that means they have those character limits. That's because these are questions that you'll ultimately would have to answer in eSnaps. And so we just tried to keep that consistent. If there's no character limits, then, there's no limits, but just be as concise as possible. I'm not going to go through all of these questions in detail, again, because I think, you can certainly read through it. Jean, to your questions, can you print and share the document? What I would recommend if you wanted to print is once you're kind of in the application, you can use your browser's kind of print function. So from there, as you can see, sort of the screen that I'm showing comes up and it will show all of these questions. So you can either, kind of do the save as a PDF, save it as a PDF to your computer, print it out, or you could certainly probably, just print it out, like select your printer and print it out there. So if you wanted to print it, that's how I would recommend that you print it in that way. There's not otherwise like a print function built in at this point. So I want to kind of skip towards I'm just going to scroll real quick through this application just to show you the portion with the attachments and then what it will look like once you submit it. So when you get to section D of the application, here is where it's going to ask you for your budget spreadsheet to be uploaded. So again, you're going to be reminded here that you're going to need to download the appropriate spreadsheet from HAN's website. We link back to our website here. So just be sure that you've downloaded and completed the appropriate spreadsheet. You're going to upload it, select a file. I think going to click on that. It's going to take you to your file browser. I think we're probably all pretty familiar with how to select a file and upload it into, an online portal like this. It's pretty user friendly. This budget spreadsheet is this one. And then if you have that coordinated entry letter of support are really the only two attachments that are going to be required. The rest of these attachments are optional if you have them. So and again, you can certainly read through this, your agency's audit, your financial audit, including the A133, if you have it. I know for some of you, you have already submitted your audit with your renewal application. We are asking you to resubmit it here just so we have it with your new project as well. Likewise, any monitoring reports from HUD, if you are currently receiving CoC funding, if you have a monitoring report from HUD from March of 2022 to March of 2023. So really just within that past, that time frame is what we're looking for. Likewise, if you currently receive or had received funding from the city of Detroit for homeless service funding, and if you have monitoring or audit reports, again, from March of 22 to March of 23, we ask that you upload those. So in this case, you may need to be, for both these monitoring reports, you may need to, scan together multiple PDF documents. If you have, let's use the HUD example, you have a monitoring report from HUD, if you had findings and you submitted your response to those findings from HUD, and then HUD came back and said, yep, those findings are resolved, that's probably going to be like 3 separate documents. We would ask that you scan those all together into one PDF file and upload that one file here in this place here, just to give us the entire picture of what happened with that monitoring report, any findings, how you resolve those findings, and if HUD accepted that resolution. The rest of these, you'll, like the eviction prevention policy, termination policy, you'll see reference to these policies in prior questions in the application. So there's a section in the application that talks about how do you as an agency try to prevent people from being terminated from your program. So there will be a narrative response you'll have to respond to, and then likewise we ask for your termination policy if you have one. I referenced kind of at the beginning of this webinar, we had talked about leveraging housing and healthcare resources. So there are a couple of narrative responses regarding that earlier on in the application. If you have the documentation on that leverage, again, you would upload that here. If you have match documentation, you're going to upload that here. Match documentation of your match is optional. Agencies that are able to document match may get more points in their application, but it is an optional attachment. There then is this signature page. So in the past, you were used to kind of signing either with real ink or electronically. The signature page, that just is certain things that you're certifying to. Again, that's all built in electronically here. So you're going to need to read through it. Really, your checkbox by checking the box and typing your name below, it's your affirmation of agreement to the things in that signature page. So as I said before, as you're working on the application, at any point you can select save as a draft. I think the system will periodically kind of auto save for you as well, but it's never a bad idea to occasionally just hit save draft. At any time then you can log out, go to something else, log back in, and pick up where you started. Once you're done, or once you think you're done, if you mark complete. So I just marked complete, but I got a flag that, oh, yep, I need to upload my budget spreadsheet. I forgot to upload that. So this is where you'll see, the system will kind of flag that. So let me just select a file, upload it, and save. So now I should be able to mark complete. All right, so once you have answered all the questions, uploaded all of your documentation, you're going to mark complete. It's really important, though, that there's one more step you need to take. At this point, you can still edit it. You can still go back in, open it up, edit it, make changes. In order to actually submit the application, you have to hit the submit button. So please don't just mark complete and then think it's been submitted. You have to hit the submit button. Once you have hit submit, you're going to see that this application has been submitted. So from there on out, you'll only be able to view the application. You can open it up, view it. Again, this is your kind of pretty basic view only status. You won't be able to make any additional edits. You'll also be able to, if you go back to your home page, you'd be able to see this is the one that I just submitted. You can see it's under review, meaning it's now been submitted to us. It's on our end to go through the review process. So that kind of key thing, once you mark complete, you still need to hit submit in order for it to actually be submitted. I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions about the portal. you submit prior to the deadline, there's an opportunity for you to send it back. If you find something that's been changed. I'm going to say no to that, because that would really, once it's submitted, I mean, number one, you know, that would, I don't know that we're going to have the capacity to kind of keep track of who needs to have theirs sent back to you know, open it back up. So really think of this like, again, if you've worked in eSnaps or other online portals, or once you kind of submit something, once it's submitted, it's in, and it's going to be reviewed accordingly. So please just make sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's before you submit it. And if you, you know, if you run into any technical challenges as you're using the portal, you can reach out to me. You know, I'll kind of troubleshoot with you on that. Okay. Want to be mindful of the time, so I'm going to take the next few minutes to talk about these budget spreadsheets. Just going to do kind of a quick walkthrough of them. So again, there's two different types of budget spreadsheets. I'm first going to go over the PSH budget spreadsheet. What I'm showing here is an example. There are some things that have been filled out already. So I'm going to kind of walk through this. This is really just to show you how this spreadsheet functions. So I would say don't get too like hung up on the dollar amounts that you actually see in this spreadsheet. This is really just to show you how these different tabs of the spreadsheet interact with each other. So for these PSH budget spreadsheets, you'll notice it asks for a pretty significant amount of information. This is really to help us have an understanding of overall, how is this PSH project funded? What are all of the different funding sources going into it, kind of the whole scope of the project. So the first tab that you see here, this instructions tab, is just that. It's instructions for each of the subsequent tabs. So you can always refer back to this instructions tab. The example that I'm going through here would be for an expansion grant. So I'll kind of point that out along the way, but you would use this spreadsheet whether you're applying for an expansion funding or just regular kind of new project funding, either one of the two. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first tab you're going to complete is going to ask about your personnel, your total personnel for your program. So you're going to see here as well how this spreadsheet will help to calculate where your project is in regards to this 1:20 ratio that we really want to see for programs. So you're going to start with filling out, we have these different staff positions titled, you know, labeled. There are certainly kind of room for other project personnel if what we have listed here isn't aligning with your program. You're going to indicate the FTE for that position for this entire project, not just for the CoC funding that you're requesting. So particularly, you know, for tabs B and C, you're going to think entire PSH project, not just the specific funding request. So you're going to enter the total FTEs or full-time equivalents for these different positions, what their annual salary is. If you just happen to include, you know, benefits with the salary, you can include that all as one number here. That's really just up to you, however your agency does that. This orange box here will then total the total annual personnel salaries. So this will automatically total the annual salaries, even based on if it's like a partial position. The formulas are structured in that way. I should have said too, as you go throughout these spreadsheets, any orange cell has a formula in it that will automatically calculate. The blue cells are where you will be entering information that applies to your program. So also on this tab B, you're going to enter the number of households that your project would be serving if this project is at full capacity. So in this example, I'm saying if this project was operating at full capacity, I would have 60 households. And you'll see later on that I'm not requesting funding for 60 units of housing because this is an expansion. But if this project was funded, both the current amount of funding and my funding that I'm requesting here, it would have 60 households, essentially 60 units of housing. What the last couple of lines here will automatically calculate is essentially it's going to say, okay, you're going to serve 60 households. In order to get to that 1 to 20 ratio, you need to have at least 3 case managers. It's going to look at the number of case management staff that you've indicated, 3 case managers in this case. And so it's going to show you kind of that comparison of where you're at for in case management ratios as it compared to how many case managers you would need to be at that 1 to 20 ratio. So that's just sort of a way to kind of check how you're doing there. And Jean, your question for the current program or the proposed program. So again, for parts B and C of this spreadsheet, it's for both. It's going to be for what you're currently doing, as well as what the entire program, what you would be doing if you were funded. Tab D is where you're going to get into the specifics of just the funding that's requested in this application. So once you've gone through the personnel, we're going to click over to the total project budget, and you're going to see where some things will carry over from the other spreadsheet. I need to freeze this top row here. So you'll see some numbers have pulled through from the prior tab. So really the first number here, this salaries tab. So again, tab C, total project budget, we're thinking the entire project. So if you're requesting expansion funding, this is going to be what it would take for the entire project, both what you're currently doing and what you're proposing to do kind of all together. So the first part of this is your personnel expenses. So this pulled over from tab B, that salary amount of the personnel salaries. If you did not already include benefits in that salary number, there's a line for you to include benefits. You can either plug it in as a formula or just as a round number. If you had included salaries when you did the calculations on tab B, then you can leave this blank. Again, there's, however, there's some flexibility there. Then you're going to just think through any other personnel expenses that you may have. In this example, I included some expenses for some staff training. So I should have said too, right now we're not really in a position to go through how to develop a PSH project budget. So it may seem like I'm going through a lot of this pretty quickly. This is really just to show you how this spreadsheet functions. If you want more information on how to really develop a budget for your PSH program, let me know. I can refer you to some resources there. So after you do the personnel expenses, you're going to move to this next part of the budget, which is your project operating expenses. And so you're really just going to go through, look at these budget lines and fill them out appropriately. Again, this would be the annual budget for your project. This is where you'll likely have to work closely with your finance department to your accounting department to have an understanding of what these expenses are. If anything doesn't apply, you can just leave that cell blank if it doesn't apply. There is a formula built in here in this cell for staff mileage. And then there's some additional kind of instructions here to help you if you need assistance in figuring out kind of how to calculate staff mileage. That is given there as well. There's some sort of blank general lines for any other operating expenses that may not have been included above. You can include those dollar amounts there with an explanatory note. And then you're going to see that subtotal will total there. All right, the next section then are direct client expenses. So these are kind of, as the name implies, expenses related to the clients that would be expended on their behalf. So I want to make a note here about this client rental payment amount. So just this note here, if you are, there's kind of this caveat here, so you want to pay attention to this. If you are not requesting expansion funding, then the amount that you give here should be the same as the amount that you're going to be requesting under your funding request spreadsheet, which you'll get to in Part D. If you are requesting expansion funding, then the amount that you give here should be the same as, should be the same as the amount that you're requesting in this application plus your current rental assistance, or what you're currently getting in your your renewal grant. So essentially, this rental payments is what you receive, the funding that you receive for the payment of those rental assistance, or what you hope to receive either through this application or through this application plus what you currently get. So that's what's going to go there in the client rental payments section. Then for these other client expenses, again, you're just going to go through, if some of this needs to be an estimate, you can estimate it. If you know figures based on, how this program has operated in the past, enter that. So again, security deposits, utility deposits, transportation, furniture, household items. This is not intended to be client expenses that are all billable to your CoC program, but these are your total client expenses that you incur for your project. So the expenses will then total. You're then going to get to an opportunity to add your admin costs. These would be your indirect costs. You can either enter a whole number there or a percentage. I just entered 10% of my direct project costs as admin. So my total project cost here is just under $1.4 million. So those are my costs. So now I have to enter my project revenue. So the sources of funding that I'm requesting to cover the costs. So under the project revenue here, this is where if you are requesting expansion funding, you're going to enter the amount of your current CoC grant. So your current FY 2022 CoC grant. If you're not requesting expansion funding, you're just going to leave that cell blank. But again, because this is intended to be an overall picture of your project's budget, we want to include inflow of income into that budget, your current CoC program funding. The next line, you're not going to enter anything here. This is going to pull from tab D once we get to that. That will be the amount of funding that you're requesting in this application as an additional line of income. And then the rest of these lines will be any other sources of income that are coming into this project, whether that's project income, rental payments the client pays to your agency, Medicaid reimbursement, any other grant funding, any other source of revenue. You're going to enter on those lines there. You'll then see where you'll enter additional details on that in tab E. So once you've entered all of the income, you're going to have this total project revenue. Line H, or section H, is then going to compare your total project expenses or total project costs with what you have projected for your total income. Essentially, you don't want a negative number here. A negative number means that your expenses exceed your revenue. And so you want to have, in this instance, they're showing about $1,000 to the positive here. All right, I saw some questions. So Jane, I will circle back to your question just because we can talk about the budget stuff. So Jean, for client furniture, no, not necessarily. Client furniture is not necessarily an allowable expense for CoC programs. There's some really nuanced opportunities and when it could be allowable. It depends on the budget line and the type of furniture that you're purchasing. So my point is, and as I said, this is intended to be a reflection not just of billable expenses to your CoC grant, but overall your project as a whole of what you spend money on for your clients. If you have another source of funding that you use to purchase furniture or household goods like cleaning products once someone moves in, that's an expense that you're incurring for the program. It's not intended to be only CoC billable costs. There's an assumption built into this budget form that there are other sources of funding flowing into your program. I should say, other sources of revenue that could be cash or in-kind revenue coming into your program to support the program. I mean, you have to have match funding, but there could be other sources of funding as well. I'm going to come back to the non-budget questions. So Dawn, I see your question as well. So let me focus on the budget questions for now, and then we'll come back to those other ones. Okay, I want to kind of keep going. So tab C, again, total picture of your entire project. So again, if you're an expansion grant, what you're currently receiving and spending your funding on, and what you are, the funding that you're applying for, what you're requesting, and how it would be spent. All right, tab D is where we get to the details of just what you're requesting in this application. So tab D is in this application, how much funding are you requesting? So the first top part of this spreadsheet is a summary. So again, you're going to see all of these orange cells. Those have formulas built into them, so you're not going to type anything into those cells. Rather, you're going to scroll down, and you're going to fill out the appropriate kind of budget line of what you're requesting in this application. So there's a rental assistance budget, there's the leased units budget, there's the leased structures budget, there's an operating budget, supportive services, and then HMIS. There's a tab in the spreadsheet, tab G, which goes into all of the details on what the eligible costs are in the CoC program. So we don't have time to go over that today, but that information is there. I'm going to put a link in the chat box as well in a minute to additional resources on eligible costs. But essentially, tab D, you're going to go through and fill out what budget lines you're requesting. So in this example, I'm requesting, I'm submitting an application for 20 units of permanent supportive housing and supportive services. So in my budget, I've budgeted for 20 units of 20 one-bedroom units. I've selected tenant-based rental assistance. That's the type of rental assistance I want. The spreadsheet will automatically calculate my annual rental assistance amount based on the FMR. That total, that 228, will carry up to the summary budget at the top that you can see there. I'm also requesting funding for supportive services. So you can see here, I've just entered in some supportive services amounts. Again, this is just an example to show you how the spreadsheet works, but I've budgeted for case management. I've added a little bit of narrative. This is a, one FTE case manager and benefits, some food assistance. I'm budgeting for some staff mileage and some utility deposits. That total amount there will also carry over to the top of the summary budget. The one thing I really do want to point out in this supportive services budget spreadsheet is this assistance with moving costs line item. Allowable costs in this budget and this line item are only hiring a moving truck or moving company or paying for a storage unit. That's it. That's the only thing that's allowed in this assistance with moving costs budget. So do not include security deposits in this budget, allow assistance with moving costs. That is not an eligible cost in this line item. So we see that pretty frequently. So I just wanted to make a note. The assistance with moving costs line item is just storage and a moving company. So it's quite limited. So you're going to fill out your supportive services budget. Lastly, if you're requesting HMIS funding, you can fill that out, what you're requesting there. This will all carry up to the summary budget. Again, this is the request for this particular application that you are submitting. So in this case, you're not going to include if you're an expansion grant, you're not going to include what you're currently funded for with rental assistance. You're only going to include here what you're asking in this application. So the spreadsheet will then total the maximum admin that you could request. You can request up to 10% in admin. So that's given here just to let you know what that dollar amount is. You're going to fill in that blue cell how much admin you actually are requesting, whether it's up to that 10% or less. And then this amount here, this is the total CoC funding you're requesting in this application. So in this case, it's 354,000 and some change. So you'll see where this amount of what you're requesting pulls over to that other tab C, the total project budget of your total, the requested CoC funding. You see that there. So lastly, on tab D, we're going to talk about match. So this is the one instance in this spreadsheet where it is going to ask you for information about your expansion grant. So this right here, we're getting to your total match obligation, not just what you're asking for here, but if you currently receive CoC funding, you have a current match obligation. So this is getting to the whole picture. So you need to enter here what your current match requirement is for your current grant that you're seeking to expand. This spreadsheet is then going to calculate the match requirement for your requested funding. Match is 25% of what you are requesting, except for leasing. Leasing is not subject to that match requirement. So the total match that you would be obligated to provide if you were funded for both your expansion and this grant is then given here, the 250. If you're not requesting an expansion funding, you're just going to leave this blue cell blank, and it's just going to give you the match for your request here. All right, tabs E and F are then going to go into more detail on other sources of revenue, including your match funding. So tab E, again, you're going to see a lot of things in orange here. This is all information that has pulled over from tab C, where you have inputted other sources of revenue for your grant, whether that's, in this example, Medicaid reimbursement, grant funding, other source of income. All of this information with their dollar amounts has pulled over into this other sources of revenue. So now this is where the spreadsheet is asking, you told me you got these other sources of money. Tell me more about these other sources. Who are they from? It's this grant, it's a grant funding. What foundation is it from? Is this a committed source of funding? How is this funding going to be used? You can kind of read through this. And more importantly, is this going to be used as match? So in some of the examples that I gave here, the other sources of revenue that I identified, some I said, yes, this is going to be match, or no, it's not going to be match. For anything that is match, you're going to indicate the dollar amount. And then if you are uploading an attachment, documenting that match with your application. You're then going to go to tab F. We're going to finish documenting your match. So tab F is going to be the total culmination of, are you demonstrating sufficient match for this, your total grant, again, of what it would be if you were funded for everything. So the total match that was identified is going to pull over into this cell here. And these lines, then it's going to pull over the total value of the cash match that you identified on tab E. If you have any in-kind match, you're going to fill that out here on the top part of this spreadsheet. It's going to total this all up. So in this example, we go back to tab D, my entire match obligation for my expansion grant plus this request was $251,104. That's the total match I'd have to demonstrate. So do you see that 251 carried over here? Through cash match and in-kind match, I'm demonstrating I have $255,000 in match. So I'm demonstrating I would have sufficient match for this project if I was funded. I'm going to drop in the chat. We often get a lot of questions regarding match. We don't have the time here today to go over in a lot of details about match. So if you need more information about what's allowable for match and what's not, check that HUD website. That will give you some more information there. All right, I know we're running low on time, so I'm just going to kind of keep going. I know we have still some outstanding questions in the chat. I want to quickly, so this was the PSH budget. Maybe just pause here. Just any specific, I know this PSH budget I went over really quickly. There's a lot of information there. The instructions, again, are all printed here, so you can certainly read through them. You can always contact me afterwards if you want some additional kind of tutorial and walking through the budget. Okay, The other budget form, this is for basically every other type of project that's not PSH. This also is a spreadsheet that needs to be completed. However, you'll find that this spreadsheet is a lot more simple than the PSH budget. So I guess that's an advantage if you're requesting non-PSH funding. So again, the instructions are on tab A that you can refer to. Really, the biggest difference here with these budget spreadsheets, you're only going to be filling this out based on what you are requesting with this application. So you don't need to consider the entire project budget. You don't need to consider, the only thing you would need to consider in terms of an expansion is when it comes to calculating this match, but it's a lot more simple. You're just going to jump right to this tab B where you fill out what you're requesting for this particular project. So in this example, I'm doing like a rapid rehousing project. And so I'm requesting 25 units of rapid rehousing. So I fill out this rental assistance budget line, the supportive services budget line, like I did with the other one. You can see the spreadsheet functions in the same way. Again, what you don't have to fill out is that personnel spreadsheet, that total project budget spreadsheet. And then the match spreadsheet, again, is a lot more simple. This is just asking about match. What match are you bringing to the project? Again, what's the dollar amount? How is the match going to be used? And then it will do some calculations just to make sure that you are demonstrating enough match to meet those match obligations. So the spreadsheet, again, for non-PSH projects is a lot more simple. So it will take less time to go through that. Okay. Any questions on the budget spreadsheets before I go to the other questions? Okay, let me go back up to the other questions. So we go to Jane's question about, let me pull up the funding priority hierarchy. So I'm showing the slide here. So this again is in the RFP packet as well. But in general, we're first going to be allocating funding to PSH programming, starting with PSH projects that are going to bring on new units. And then as we work our way down the list, then we would allocate funding to rapid rehousing, and then HMIS, and then a new expansion coordinated entry project. Again, this is other than that set aside project. This is for the CoC bonus. For the domestic violence bonus funding, it's again, rapid rehousing, then transitional housing, the joint component, and then the coordinated entry. And then to Dawn, to your question, the rationale on why new PSH projects are asked to show past housing and income and employment outcomes, but expansion PSH projects are not. So that's a great question. And so this gets to some of the differences in the evaluation criteria. So expansion projects will be evaluated on their past outcomes, but it's going to be based on the performance, the past performance of their existing projects. So that's going to be based on our renewal projects are all under review right now. So we're going to take the score that they are receiving on that renewal grant and apply it to their new project. So some of this detail is given in the RFP as well. So they are going to be essentially evaluated on those past outcomes. It's just we're going to, instead of looking at your narrative, explain to us what you've done in the past. We already have data to know what they did in the past. So we're going to apply that data to the project. So great. All right, I know we are right at 3. We can, certainly don't want to rush if folks have additional questions. I realize this was a lot of information, especially the budgeting things that kind of came at you quickly. But we can certainly pause for additional questions. Let me actually get towards the end of my presentation here. So again, as we close, everything is due by noon on August 4th, submitted through the portal. with all of those attachments. And as we've referenced earlier, once you hit the submit button, it is submitted. You're not going to be able to go back in and make any adjustments. We've gone over the budget spreadsheet. So my contact information is there. I will also put it in the chat. It's also on the website. So you can feel free to email me. Let me drop my phone in there too. You can get a hold of me as you go along. I'm more than happy to answer questions that may be of a more sort of like technical nature. So Jean, yes, if I want to talk with your finance department about some of the functionality of the budget spreadsheet or what we're looking for, happy to answer that. If you're asking a question that may be the kind of thing where it may give you an edge or an advantage over another applicant. If I answer it, I may not be able to answer the question, so I might just kind of have to take that as it comes. But particularly with how these spreadsheets function, how that online portal functions, anything related to that, happy to answer it. If you have questions around, how, eligible costs for CoC programs or what have you, absolutely can answer questions. Just send your questions my way. If I can't answer it, I'll let you know. But don't hesitate to ask. So again, this recording will be posted within a couple of days. So you can always just fast forward if you need to the spreadsheet part again, if you need to review that piece again. So all right, I will just pause for another couple of seconds if there's any additional questions that folks have. I appreciate your time this afternoon. I know this was a lot. I'm excited to read your applications and hear about all the great work that you're doing. So thank you, everyone. And we will close the webinar. Have a great day.